meditated on the Humber bank and surveyed the deep waters as she had done every day of her life. From her childhood on the wharfs to her wifehood in the mean house in the rat-infested alley on its banks, and contemplated that all she knew was that beyond the spit of Spurn the river emptied itself into the yawning mouth of the German Ocean. But upriver, of that she knew nothing. Having no patient mother or wise father who might have explained the river's direction, she had only hearsay that the river split into two, dividing itself and going separate ways. And what then? Did other rivers, streams and creeks fall into these mighty waters, cascading down hills and rushing through valleys to swell the rushing waters of the Humber? She'd wrapped her shawls around her. A wind was rising, cold and sharp, coming in from the sea. It disturbed the water's dull surface, agitating it into frothy white crests, and she saw by the increasing undercurrent that the tide was on the turn. The river was on a journey, and she was compelled to follow it. The sun was breaking through the clouds. Lying low on the skyline, it transformed the dark water to a pale mirror of gold and shimmered through the gossamer strands of dispersing mist, and she realized that shipping, schooners and cutters, colliers and trading luggers would soon be moving upriver, and that the footpath by the bank and the old road just beyond it would start to become busy with travellers making their way between the towns of Hessel and Hull. "I'll have to hide," she thought, glancing along the narrow shore. "Maybe I can sleep for a bit and then move on again tonight." It wasn't far, she'd heard, to the town of Hessel. Only 5 or 6 miles, though she had never been. But she knew of the town, where they built ships, and a ferry since ancient times had run a passage across the shortest stretch of the Humber to Barton in Lincolnshire. She could see the banks of that country now as it appeared through the fog, and wondered if she could get there. Nobody would know me there, she considered. But she started to tremble at the prospect of someone remarking on the sight of a strange woman travelling alone across the water and asking questions. The sound of voices and the jangle of a harness startled her, and she jumped down onto the pebbled foreshore and pressed herself into the side of the bank. She didn't look up until she judged that the travellers had passed, then peered over the top to see the retreating figure of a man holding the reins of a mare, which pulled a small cart in which a woman was sitting. "They're off to market," she mouthed. "I'd best be sharp and find somewhere safe." She hauled herself up the grassy bank onto the road and scurried along it, afraid of being seen. Beyond the road lay fields and meadowland, and between the grassy areas were strips of scrub, common balk, overgrown with hawthorn and bramble, which marked the boundary and divided up the ownership of land. Into the thick of this she scrambled, sliding down into the ditch at the roadside and into the undergrowth, not heeding the thorns which tore her hands and pulled the threads of her shawl and skirt. She scrabbled on her hands and knees as far into the thicket as she could, pulling aside the prickly stems of dog-rose and blackthorn, and noting the red hips and blue-black plum-like fruits which hung there. "I wonder if I can eat them." Her stomach was beginning to gnaw with hunger. She fished from beneath her skirts for the parcel of bread which she'd hidden there, and, chewing slowly to make it last longer, she ate half of it. Then, rewrapping the remaining piece, she pinned it carefully back beneath her skirt, placing it next to a small bag of coins. As she lay in her small dark cave, her shawls pulled about her and her head resting on her hands, she heard voices from time to time, the sound of laughter and the measured clip of donkeys' and horses' hooves, and she shrank further into the undergrowth, praying that she wouldn't be seen from the road. The day drew on, and towards midday, as the warmth of the sun reached her, she dropped off into intermittent sleep. Her body twitched as she dreamed, and she moaned softly. "Me poor bairns! Me poor bairns! What'll become of us? Lizzie, I did it for thee." In her dreams, she saw again the smiling face of Francis.